Simon Cowell had long been recognized as one of the most influential figures in modern entertainment. His reputation was built on sharp honesty, a confident presence, and an instinct for identifying talent before others could see it. Through shows such as Pop Idol, American Idol, The X Factor, and Britain's Got Talent, he became a household name across continents. Audiences knew him as the judge who rarely softened his words, someone who valued performance and discipline over sentimentality. That persona, combined with his business ventures in music production and artist management, turned him into a powerful force in the industry. For years, his life revolved around schedules packed with auditions, production meetings, international travel, and high-pressure decisions that shaped the careers of countless performers. He thrived in that environment, often appearing as though nothing could disrupt his rhythm. Fame, criticism, praise, and controversy became normal parts of his daily existence. Yet beneath that structured and demanding lifestyle, subtle shifts were beginning to form that would eventually reshape his entire perspective on success, family, and purpose. What appeared to the public as a consistent rise in influence was, behind the scenes, slowly intersecting with personal developments that would alter everything he thought he understood about his future. These changes did not arrive dramatically at first, but instead unfolded gradually, woven into moments that seemed ordinary at the time. Only later would they reveal how deeply they had redirected his priorities and emotional world. A relationship that changed public perception and private direction. A significant shift in Simon Cowell's personal life began when he entered a relationship with Lauren Silverman. At the time, the situation attracted widespread media attention due to its complicated circumstances and the involvement of individuals connected through friendship circles. The public narrative quickly became intense, with headlines focusing more on speculation than on the actual people involved. Despite the scrutiny, the relationship continued to develop, and soon the news of an expected child added another layer to an already highly publicized situation. This moment marked a turning point not only in how the public viewed him but also in how he began to reflect on his own identity outside of work. For someone who had previously expressed little interest in fatherhood, the idea of becoming a parent began to take on new emotional weight. As the media cycle intensified, Simon found himself navigating a space where personal decisions were constantly interpreted through public commentary. Yet within that noise, something more personal was forming quietly. The idea of responsibility, legacy, and emotional connection began to shift from abstract concepts into real considerations. The upcoming birth of his son would become the catalyst for a deeper transformation that no professional achievement had ever triggered. What followed was not simply a change in circumstances, but a gradual reordering of priorities that would soon redefine how he approached every aspect of life. The arrival of fatherhood and a shift in identity. The birth of his son, Eric, marked a profound emotional shift for Simon Cowell. In that moment, the structured world he had built around his career began to feel different. Fatherhood introduced a level of emotional awareness that had not previously been central to his identity. The experience was not just about responsibility but about connection, vulnerability, and the realization that life could no longer revolve solely around professional ambition. He began to reassess how he spent his time, often choosing to be more present in situations he would previously have delegated or avoided. Work remained important, but it no longer held exclusive control over his decisions. The presence of his son introduced a new rhythm to his life, one that required patience, attention, and emotional investment. Simple moments, such as observing his child's early growth, became unexpectedly meaningful. These experiences began to reshape his understanding of success. Instead of focusing purely on career milestones, he started to place value on personal milestones within his family life. This shift did not happen overnight but evolved gradually as fatherhood became a defining part of his daily reality. The transition also brought emotional depth that he had not often expressed publicly. While his public persona remained largely unchanged, privately he was adapting to a version of life that demanded more reflection, care, and emotional presence than ever before. Early observations that sparked quiet concern. As Eric grew, Simon began noticing small developmental differences that stood out during everyday interactions. These observations were not initially alarming in isolation, but over time they formed a pattern that prompted deeper thought. Communication milestones, responses to sensory environments, and social engagement all appeared to develop in ways that felt different from typical expectations. At first, there was hesitation in interpreting these signs. Like many parents, he considered the possibility that children develop at their own pace. However, As time passed, the consistency of certain behaviors made it difficult to ignore the underlying questions forming in his mind. The silence where speech was expected and the heightened sensitivity to noise or crowded environments became recurring points of reflection. Despite reassurances from others that variation in development is common, Simon found himself increasingly attentive to every detail. His background in observing human behavior made him particularly aware of subtle patterns, and this awareness contributed to growing internal uncertainty. Rather than reacting with panic, he responded with careful observation and quiet concern. This period marked the beginning of a deeper search for understanding. Instead of drawing conclusions, he began gathering information, reading, and paying closer attention to expert perspectives on child development. What he discovered only expanded the complexity of his thoughts rather than providing immediate clarity. Growing awareness and emotional uncertainty. As time progressed, the observations surrounding Eric's development became more consistent, leading Simon into a phase of emotional uncertainty. He began to question not only what he was seeing, but also how best to respond. This was not a moment of crisis, but rather a gradual realization that required patience and understanding. Everyday situations became opportunities for reflection. Social environments, communication attempts, and behavioral responses were all carefully noted. While others around him continued to offer reassurance, Simon found himself increasingly focused on understanding the underlying causes behind what he was witnessing. This period was emotionally complex. On one hand, there was deep affection and protective instinct toward his son. On the other, there was uncertainty about how to interpret the signs he was observing. That combination created a quiet tension that influenced his decisions, routines, and even his ability to fully relax. Rather than making assumptions, he began seeking professional insight. Conversations with specialists, research into developmental conditions, and discussions with close family members became part of his ongoing attempt to understand the situation more clearly. The process was gradual, requiring patience and emotional resilience. Through it all, one consistent element remained: his commitment to supporting his son in whatever way was needed, even as clarity had not yet fully emerged. Adjusting daily life around a new reality. As concerns became more defined, Simon began making subtle but meaningful adjustments to his lifestyle. Work commitments that once dominated his schedule were reconsidered in light of his responsibilities at home. Travel was reduced, long production commitments were evaluated more carefully, and time spent with family became increasingly prioritized. This shift was not abrupt, but steady. It reflected a growing awareness that his role as a father required presence and consistency. The fast-paced nature of his career remained, but it was no longer the sole organizing force in his life. Instead, a new structure began to form around his son's needs. Daily routines started to carry more significance. Small moments, such as structured activities, predictable environments, and calm settings, became important in creating stability. This required not only physical adjustments but also emotional adaptation. Patience became a central part of his approach, as did flexibility. While the outside world continued to see him as a high-profile media figure, privately he was transitioning into a different role, one centered on caregiving, observation, and support. The balance between public responsibility and private life became increasingly delicate, requiring careful management. A deeper understanding of neurodiversity and acceptance in daily life. As time went on, Simon Cowell's understanding of autism moved beyond medical definitions and therapy plans into something far more personal and lived. It was no longer just about labels or reports, but about how his son experienced the world every single day. He began to notice that what once looked like limitations from an outside perspective often carried their own form of intelligence, sensitivity, and perception. Eric's way of engaging with his environment wasn't random or lacking structure. It was simply different. Patterns, repetition, and visual order became meaningful tools for him to process the world. Instead of trying to force conventional expectations, Simon started learning how to meet his son where he naturally was. This shift in thinking marked a significant emotional transition, from correction to acceptance. Acceptance did not mean giving up on support or development. Instead, it meant removing the idea that there was a single, quote-unquote, correct way to grow. This realization softened earlier anxieties and replaced them with a more grounded sense of responsibility. Simon began to understand that progress would not always look linear or familiar. This evolving mindset influenced not only parenting decisions but also how he viewed people more broadly. He became more aware of how often society overlooks differences in communication, behavior, and learning styles. In that awareness, he found a deeper appreciation for individuality, especially in children who process the world in ways that do not conform to traditional expectations. Emotional struggles. Behind the public image. Despite maintaining a composed public image, Simon experienced emotional challenges that were largely invisible to the outside world. The demands of managing a high-profile career while also being deeply involved in his son's development created a constant internal balancing act. There were days when emotional fatigue quietly accumulated, even if it was never publicly acknowledged. He often had to compartmentalize his life, presenting confidence in professional settings while privately managing concern, responsibility, and emotional reflection. This separation became a necessary survival mechanism, allowing him to function in both worlds without letting one fully overwhelm the other. There were moments of quiet vulnerability that rarely surfaced publicly. These were not dramatic breakdowns, but subtle emotional weight carried in silence. During late nights, during travel, or during moments when he observed his son navigating challenges with persistence and effort. Those moments often carried more emotional impact than any public criticism or professional pressure. What made this period particularly complex was the lack of open conversation around such experiences. While many saw only success and fame, the reality included caregiving responsibilities that required constant attention and emotional resilience. Over time, he learned to manage this internal duality, even if it never fully disappeared. The role of support systems and trusted professionals. As Eric's developmental journey continued, the importance of support systems became increasingly clear. Simon did not attempt to navigate everything alone. Instead, he worked closely with therapists, educators, and specialists who could provide structured guidance and consistent feedback. These professionals played a crucial role in shaping routines, suggesting strategies, and helping identify practical approaches to communication and sensory regulation. Their involvement ensured that Eric's development was supported in a way that was both informed and adaptive. Equally important was the emotional support provided by close family and trusted individuals. While they may not have fully understood every technical aspect of autism, their presence offered stability and reassurance. This combination of professional expertise and personal care created a balanced environment for Eric's growth. Simon also became more educated in these areas himself. He began to understand terminology, therapeutic approaches, and developmental frameworks that once felt distant from his world. This learning process was gradual but transformative, allowing him to engage more meaningfully in decisions about his son's care. Over time, this network of support became an essential foundation, ensuring that no single person carried the responsibility alone, and that Eric received consistent, thoughtful guidance. Moments of progress that carried deep meaning. Within the structured routines and therapeutic work, there were small but significant moments of progress that held immense emotional value. These were not necessarily dramatic milestones, but subtle signs of development that carried deep meaning for Simon and those close to him. A new sound, a moment of shared attention, or an instance of calm interaction could represent meaningful progress. In typical narratives of development, such moments might seem minor, but within Eric's journey, they were deeply significant indicators of connection and growth. Simon began to appreciate these moments in a different way. Instead of focusing on large expectations, he learned to recognize and value incremental progress. This shift in perspective changed how he measured development and success. Each of these moments reinforced the importance of patience and consistency. They also highlighted that progress does not always follow predictable timelines. Some days showed breakthroughs, while others required revisiting earlier steps. This rhythm became part of life. It required emotional flexibility, but it also created a deeper appreciation for effort and resilience. Over time, these small victories built a foundation of trust and understanding between father and son that extended beyond formal therapy or structured activities, redefining success beyond fame and career achievements. One of the most profound shifts in Simon Cowell's life was his redefinition of success. For much of his career, success had been measured in ratings, contracts, audience reach, and industry influence. These metrics had once defined his identity and purpose. However, fatherhood introduced a completely different framework. Success was no longer about public recognition or professional milestones. Instead, it became about stability, emotional connection, and the well-being of his son. This redefinition did not diminish his professional accomplishments, but it placed them in a different context. Work remained part of his life, but it was no longer the center of it. Instead, it became something that had to coexist with personal responsibilities, rather than overshadow them. This shift also influenced how he viewed others in the entertainment industry. He became more aware of the unseen pressures behind public success and more empathetic toward people navigating personal challenges alongside professional demands. In many ways, this new understanding of success created a more balanced perspective on life. It allowed space for both achievement and emotional fulfillment without forcing one to dominate the other. The quiet strength found in routine and consistency. As life continued to evolve, routine became one of the most important elements in maintaining stability for Eric. Predictability helped reduce stress and create a sense of safety in everyday experiences. Because of this, daily structure became carefully designed and consistently maintained. This included regular schedules for therapy, meals, rest, and activities. Even small changes were considered carefully to avoid unnecessary disruption. While this level of structure required effort and planning, it provided a foundation that supported long-term development. For Simon, this routine also brought a sense of grounding. Amid the unpredictability of public life and media attention, the consistency of home life offered stability. It became a space where focus shifted away from external pressure and toward immediate, meaningful responsibilities. Over time, routine became less of a strict system and more of a shared rhythm. It created familiarity and comfort, allowing both father and son to navigate each day with clearer expectations and reduced stress. This emphasis on consistency also reinforced patience. Progress was not measured in rapid change, but in steady continuation. That understanding became a defining part of their shared journey. Reflections on transformation, love, and long-term perspective. Looking back across the years, the transformation in Simon Cowell's life reflects a broader journey of emotional growth and shifting priorities. What began as a fast-paced, externally driven career evolved into a more grounded and personally meaningful existence centered on family. This transformation was not about abandoning ambition, but about expanding perspective. Love, responsibility, and understanding became central themes that influenced every major decision. Fatherhood introduced dimensions of life that could not be measured by public success or professional achievement. The experience also reshaped his understanding of time. Instead of focusing on immediate outcomes, he began thinking in longer horizons, what support, structure, and care would mean over years rather than moments. This long-term perspective became essential in guiding decisions. Through challenges, uncertainty, and adaptation, a deeper form of connection emerged. It was not defined by traditional expectations, but by presence, effort, and acceptance. That connection became one of the most significant outcomes of the entire journey. Final reflection on a life redefined through parenthood. Ultimately, Simon Cowell's journey as a father reflects a profound redefinition of identity, purpose, and emotional understanding. The life he once knew, built around entertainment and public influence, gradually expanded into something far more personal and enduring. The experiences surrounding his son's development brought both challenges and revelations. They required patience, adaptability, and emotional strength, but they also created a deeper appreciation for individuality and connection. What stands out most is not the change in career or public image, but the transformation in perspective. Success became less about visibility and more about presence. Achievement became less about recognition and more about understanding. In the end, the story is not defined by loss of old expectations, but by the growth of new meaning. It is a reflection of how life can shift direction unexpectedly and how love can reshape even the most established identities into something more grounded, patient, and deeply human. Seeking answers through experts and observation. As questions about Eric's development became more prominent, Simon turned to professionals for guidance. This stage involved consultations with specialists who could provide structured insight into developmental patterns and behavioral differences. These conversations offered both information and direction, helping him better understand what support systems might be necessary. The process was not about rushing toward conclusions, but about gathering clarity. Each assessment and discussion added layers of understanding, even when answers were not immediate. He approached these interactions with seriousness, recognizing that informed decisions would shape his son's future. At the same time, his own observations remained an important part of the process. Daily interactions provided real-world context that complemented professional insights. This combination of expert guidance and personal experience allowed him to build a more complete picture over time. Emotionally, this phase required resilience. Uncertainty remained present, but it was now accompanied by structured information and practical next steps. The focus gradually shifted from questioning what was happening to understanding how best to support development moving forward, a diagnosis that brought clarity and responsibility. Eventually, after a period of assessments and evaluations, a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder was identified. While this moment brought clarity, it did not simplify the emotional experience. Instead, it reframed everything that had been observed up to that point. For Simon, the diagnosis provided context rather than resolution. It helped explain patterns of communication, sensory sensitivity, and behavioral responses, but it also introduced new responsibilities. Understanding what the diagnosis meant was only the beginning. The next step was learning how to support his son effectively. The emotional impact of hearing the diagnosis was complex. There was relief in understanding, but also recognition of the long-term commitment required. It was no longer a matter of uncertainty, but of adaptation and learning. From that point forward, the focus shifted toward creating an environment that would support growth, comfort, and development. Professional guidance became even more central, and daily life began to reflect structured approaches tailored to his son's needs. Reshaping home and life for stability and comfort. Following the diagnosis, significant changes were made to the home environment to better support Eric's needs. The aim was to create a space that minimized sensory overload and encouraged calm, predictable routines. Adjustments included reducing noise, softening lighting, and organizing spaces in a way that promoted comfort and security. Daily schedules became more structured, with consistent routines helping to establish stability. Therapy sessions and developmental support activities were incorporated into everyday life. These routines required coordination and commitment, but they also provided a foundation for progress. Simon's role expanded beyond that of a parent in the traditional sense. He became deeply involved in understanding therapeutic approaches, learning strategies, and ensuring consistency across all aspects of his son's environment. This hands-on involvement became a defining part of his new lifestyle. The home itself evolved into a space designed not only for living but for support and development. Every adjustment reflected a broader commitment to creating a safe and nurturing environment, navigating public attention and protecting privacy. As awareness of Eric's condition became more public, Simon faced the challenge of balancing privacy with public curiosity. Media attention often extended beyond his professional life into deeply personal territory, creating pressure to respond or explain. Eventually, he chose to acknowledge his son's autism publicly in order to reduce speculation and encourage understanding. This decision was made carefully, with the intention of protecting his son from misrepresentation while promoting awareness. However, public attention did not diminish entirely. Instead, it shifted into a new form of scrutiny. Every appearance or mention was analyzed, often in ways that lacked understanding or sensitivity. Managing this attention required consistent boundaries and careful communication. Despite these challenges, the priority remained clear: protecting his son's well-being and ensuring that public exposure did not interfere with his development or privacy. Advocacy, awareness, and a changing public role. Over time, Simon began using his platform to raise awareness about autism and developmental differences. His focus was on promoting understanding, early support, and acceptance rather than sensational narratives. He spoke in general terms about the importance of recognizing individual differences and providing appropriate resources for families. These efforts were not centered on personal detail but on broader awareness. The response from the public included both support and increased attention. Many parents and advocacy groups expressed appreciation for the visibility, while media interest continued to grow. Navigating this balance required ongoing care. Through this role, he began to influence conversations around developmental differences in a way that extended beyond entertainment, contributing to broader awareness efforts. Redefining fatherhood and letting go of expectations. As time passed, Simon's understanding of fatherhood continued to evolve. The expectations he once held began to fade, replaced by a more present and responsive approach to parenting. Instead of focusing on traditional milestones, he learned to value smaller moments of connection and progress. This shift required letting go of certain imagined futures. While this process carried emotional weight, it also allowed space for acceptance and adaptation. Fatherhood became less about expectation and more about presence. The bond between father and son developed in its own unique way, shaped by understanding, patience, and consistency. Communication extended beyond words, relying on trust and shared experience. continuing journey, and evolving understanding. The journey did not reach a final point but continued to evolve over time. Each stage brought new challenges, insights, and adjustments. What remained constant was the commitment to understanding and supporting his son's development. Life continued to require balance between public responsibilities and private priorities. Yet within that balance, family remained central. Every decision reflected a long-term perspective focused on stability and growth. Rather than viewing the situation as a limitation, Simon came to see it as a different path, one that required adaptation, learning, and emotional depth. The journey was ongoing, shaped by both challenges and moments of connection. Conclusion of a changing perspective on life and love. Looking back, the transformation in Simon Cowell's life reflects a profound shift in priorities and understanding. What began as a high-pressure career in entertainment gradually evolved into a deeply personal journey of fatherhood and adaptation. The experience reshaped his view of success, responsibility, and emotional connection. It also highlighted the importance of acceptance, patience, and individualized understanding in parenting. While the path was not what he had originally envisioned, it became one defined by growth and meaningful connection. Ultimately, the story is not about loss of a former life, but about the development of a new one, built on awareness, care, and the ongoing commitment to supporting his son in the best way possible.